Hey there, thanks for stopping by. Today's creepy tales come from the talented Reddit user, Dicedungeon. The last one's a real gem, so stick around. Check out their profile in the description. So, without further ado, let's dive into them. I am the witness, a keeper of truths lost to time. Some stories are meant to be forgotten, for the horrors they reveal are too great to bear. This is the story of Dr. Samuel Roth, a man driven by love, guilt, and ambition. It is also the story of Evelyn West, his closest friend, who tried to stop him before it was too late. But some things, once begun, cannot be undone. Dr. Samuel Roth had once been a renowned scientist, respected for his groundbreaking work in the fields of genetics and bioengineering. His name was synonymous with genius, his ideas revolutionary, his intellect sharp. He was a man driven by discovery, never satisfied with the limits of what was known. That was, until the night everything changed. His wife, Margaret, and his young daughter, Lily, had been taken from him in the most cruel and senseless way. A thief had broken into their home, intent on stealing anything of value. When Margaret had tried to stop him, the thief panicked and killed both her and Lily, leaving Samuel to find their lifeless bodies in the aftermath. The police had called it a tragic robbery gone wrong, but Samuel could not accept that. He could not live with the knowledge that he had failed to protect the two people he loved most. Grief consumed him. It was a darkness that swallowed every part of him. The loss was unbearable, an unrelenting ache in his chest that never ceased. His mind, however, refused to succumb to despair. It clung to a singular thought, a desperate hope. What if he could bring them back? For months, Samuel buried himself in his research, ignoring his own needs, losing himself in his obsession. He pored over every text, every experiment, every theory he could find. Nothing else mattered. His wife and daughter had been taken from him, and he could not accept their loss. His grief became fuel for his scientific pursuits. The impossible became his goal. Resurrection. The thought had haunted him since their deaths, and now it consumed him entirely. At first the experiments were small, a few reanimated cells, tissue regrowth, cell stimulation. It was basic work, child's play for someone of his intellect. But it was just the beginning. The results were promising, but not enough. He needed more. He needed to bring Margaret and Lily back, whole again. He could no longer pretend that mere science had limits. It was then that Evelyn West, his old colleague and longtime friend, began to notice the changes. She had always been wary of Samuel's obsession with the dead, but when his research took a darker turn, she became deeply concerned. Samuel had always been consumed by his work, but this was different. This was no longer science. It was madness. Evelyn remembered Samuel before the tragedy. He had been brilliant, compassionate, a man of reason, but grief had shattered him, turning him into something else. She had seen the spark of madness in his eyes when they worked together, but it was a fleeting thing. Now, it was all-consuming. "Samuel," she said one evening, as they sat together in his cluttered lab, surrounded by piles of notes and failed experiments. "This has to stop. You can't undo death. You can't play God." Samuel looked at her, his eyes distant, filled with a strange, almost feverish determination. "You don't understand, Evelyn. I have to try. I have to bring them back. They can't be gone. I won't accept it." Evelyn's heart ached for him. She knew how deeply he had loved them both. But this was madness. You're not just bringing them back, Samuel. You're creating something else. You don't know what you're doing. But Samuel wasn't listening. The obsession had taken hold of him completely, and Evelyn could do nothing but watch in helpless silence as he spiraled further into his madness. She feared the worst, but there was little she could do. Then came the call. Samuel told her he had done it. He had succeeded. Margaret and Lily were alive. But Evelyn's heart sank as she heard the words. She had warned him, but now she had to see it for herself. When she arrived at his lab, Samuel was practically trembling with excitement. His face was alight with a manic joy that sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. He led her to a room at the back of the lab, where his work was laid bare. There they stood, Margaret and Lily. At first glance, they appeared to be alive. They were standing, breathing, sort of. Their faces were pale, gaunt, their eyes hollow and lifeless. Their movements were stiff, jerky, like puppets controlled by invisible strings. They were alive, barely, but something was terribly wrong. Evelyn's stomach churned as she stared at the figures before her. These were not the people she had known, not the Margaret she had shared many long conversations with, nor the Lily who had laughed so brightly. These were something else, something unnatural. "Samuel," Evelyn said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. "This isn't them. This isn't your wife and daughter." But Samuel didn't hear her. His eyes were wide with triumph. "Look at them, Evelyn. Look at what I've done. I brought them back. They're alive. I can do it for anyone, Evelyn, anyone." Evelyn took a step back, her heart hammering in her chest. She wanted to scream, to beg him to stop, but it was too late. Samuel had crossed a line from which there was no return. The creatures, Margaret and Lily, began to move toward them, their eyes fixed on Samuel with an eerie, vacant stare. Their mouths opened in a soundless snarl, their hands reaching forward, jerky and unnatural. The smell of decay filled the room. "This isn't right," Evelyn whispered, her throat tightening with dread. "Samuel, you've created something monstrous." But Samuel couldn't hear her. His eyes were wide with excitement as he stepped closer to them. "You don't understand. They're here. They're with me again." Evelyn felt her blood run cold. She knew she had to stop him before it went any further. The creatures, once Margaret and Lily, were losing whatever humanity they had. Their bodies were decaying rapidly, their movements erratic. They were driven by an insatiable hunger, a primal need to consume. Evelyn knew they had to be destroyed. The world wasn't ready for this kind of abomination. Samuel wasn't ready for it. She pulled out a syringe from her bag. It was a serum she had created in secret, a powerful chemical designed to undo the life Samuel had so carelessly forced into his creations. It was the only way. "Samuel," she said, her voice steady now. "This ends now." With a swift motion, she injected the serum into the creatures. In seconds, their bodies began to break down. Their flesh crumbled, their bones splintered, turning to dust before their eyes. The monstrous remnants of Margaret and Lily were gone, their bodies disintegrating into the very air. Samuel dropped to his knees, his face streaked with tears. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he choked out. "I just wanted them back. I wanted them to be with me again." Evelyn knelt beside him, her expression softening despite the horror they had just witnessed. "I know, Samuel," she said quietly, "but some things cannot be undone." They survived that night, but the events they had lived through would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Samuel was never the same. The guilt of what he had done weighed heavily on him. his soul scarred by the consequences of his actions. Evelyn stayed by his side, helping him rebuild what little was left of his life. But the shadows of the past would never leave them. No matter how hard they tried, they could never escape the price of defying death. Some things are not meant to be changed. Some lives are meant to stay lost, and some souls are meant to rest. I am the witness, and I have seen what happens when people try to defy the natural order. The price of resurrection is always heavier than you think. Detective work often treads the fine line between logic and the unexplainable. Facts are gathered, conclusions drawn, and yet, every so often, something slips through the cracks of reason. This is the tale of Detective Victor Craddock, a man who prided himself on his sharp mind and unshakable skepticism, traits that would be put to the ultimate test. The name Craddock is not unfamiliar to me, nor to those who recall the darker histories of their families. Bartholomew Craddock's tragic tale of greed and hubris left a stain upon his lineage, though Victor preferred to think of himself as the man who could redeem the name. Yet even he could not foresee the shadows that awaited him in a small, cursed neighborhood. Victor Craddock had seen plenty in his career, from grisly murders to convoluted fraud schemes. But when he was called to investigate a string of bizarre deaths in a quiet suburban neighborhood, he knew something about this case was different. The victims ranged in age and circumstance. A teenager electrocuted while gaming in his room, an elderly woman crushed by her collapsing shed, a jogger run over by a driverless car, all seemingly unrelated accidents, yet one detail tied them together. An albino cat, spotted near the scene every time. Victor's partner on the case, Detective James Monroe, was a stark contrast to him. Where Victor clung to reason, James reveled in folklore and superstition. "It's the omen," James said one afternoon, flipping through an old, tattered book of urban legends. "The albino cat that heralds death. Stories of it go back centuries, even millennia. Cavemen painted it on their walls. Roman scribes mentioned it. And even today, there are reports of it tied to fatal accidents worldwide." Victor rolled his eyes. An albino cat is a coincidence, not a cause. James leaned forward, his expression serious. "You don't believe in curses, but what if it's not the cat itself? What if it's some force tied to it? Something that brings death wherever it walks?" Victor dismissed the idea, but couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his chest. The investigation led the two detectives to a series of strange accounts from the neighbors. A retired teacher recalled feeding the cat one evening, only to trip and break her hip moments later. A landscaper swore he'd seen it watching him just before his co-worker's mower exploded. A delivery driver mentioned nearly hitting the cat before veering into a ditch. "The cat is real," Victor admitted, though begrudgingly, "but it's just an animal." That night, Victor decided to stake out the neighborhood, hoping to observe the mysterious feline. James, of course, joined him, carrying a bag of salt and a silver cross. His precautions, he called them. They waited in silence for hours, parked in Victor's car on the street. The wind howled, and the occasional flicker of a street lamp cast eerie shadows across the road. At midnight, they saw it. The albino cat was almost spectral in appearance, its snow-white fur gleaming under the moonlight. It moved with an unnatural grace, its crimson eyes glowing faintly. It stopped in front of a house, stared at the window, and then vanished into the bushes. Moments later, the sound of shattering glass filled the air. Victor and James rushed toward the house, finding a man sprawled on the floor of his living room. A heavy bookshelf had toppled over, pinning him beneath it. "He's alive," James said, pulling the man free. Victor scanned the room, his heart racing. The cat was nowhere to be found. The pattern repeated over the next few nights. Wherever the cat appeared, disaster followed. Victor's skepticism wavered, though he refused to admit it outright. "It's not magic," he insisted. "There has to be a logical explanation. Maybe the cat's movements are spooking people, causing them to act recklessly." James wasn't convinced. What about the accidents it couldn't possibly influence, like the jogger and the driverless car? Victor had no answer. Their investigation came to a head when they tracked the cat to an abandoned lot at the edge of town. The lot was overgrown with weeds, and in its center stood a crumbling stone pillar, etched with strange symbols. Victor felt a chill as he examined the pillar. "This isn't normal." "It's older than this town," James said. "Maybe older than civilization itself. What if this is the cat's anchor, its connection to our world?" Before Victor could respond, the cat appeared, perched atop the pillar. It stared at them with its crimson eyes, unblinking. Victor raised his flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness. The cat didn't move. "What do we do?" he asked. James hesitated. "Destroy the pillar." Using a crowbar from the car, they smashed the pillar to rubble. With each blow, the air grew heavier, and a low, almost imperceptible hum filled their ears. When the pillar finally collapsed, the cat let out an ear-piercing screech. Its form shimmered, twisted, and then dissolved into nothingness. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, leaving the two detectives gasping for breath. "It's over," James said, though his voice was shaky. Victor wasn't so sure. The strange death stopped, and the neighborhood returned to normal. But Victor couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't defeated the cat, only banished it. Months later, he received an anonymous package containing a photograph of an albino cat sitting atop a similar stone pillar. The location was unrecognizable, but the message was clear. The omen was still out there, waiting for its next chapter. Victor Craddock learned that some mysteries cannot be solved, only survived. He faced a fragment of the unknown and lived to tell the tale. But the omen is eternal, a force that has walked beside humanity since the dawn of time. Beware the pale cat, for where it treads, death follows. And if you don't, then I, the witness, will know your story next. In the Supernatural Experience Therapy group, there was one who always stood apart, not by choice, but by compulsion. A man named Vincent, his words twisted into rhymes like some macabre poet. He claimed he could only speak this way because of what had happened to him, the story he was compelled to share. What he revealed that day was both haunting and strange, a tale of possession and poetic damnation. But even I, the witness, did not see the final twist coming. Now I pass this story to you as it was revealed to me. Pay close attention, for the words carry more weight than they seem. Vincent started. "I speak in rhymes, as you can see, for this is how it cursed me. The demon came one silent night and bound my words to rhyme's delight. It started small, a voice in dreams, a whisper soft, a wicked scheme. Come rhyme with me, it kindly said, "and I will show what lies ahead." I thought it harmless, just a jest, a figment spawned of nightly rest. But each day more the rhymes would grow, until they ruled all speech I know. At first it seemed a gift, a boon. I spoke like poets under the moon. Yet soon I found it wasn't free. This gift was chains that tortured me. Vincent paused, his eyes scanning the circle. The others shifted in their chairs, uneasy. The fluorescent lights above seemed to flicker faintly, though perhaps it was just a trick of the mind. He continued, his voice steady, yet tinged with sorrow. Vincent explained that the demon came to him as a jester figure with glowing magenta eyes, appearing in his dreams. The creature called itself Cadencio, a spirit of rhythm and verse. It promised him unparalleled eloquence, the ability to charm and persuade anyone with his words. I was a fool. I took its hand and found myself in cursed land. My tongue no longer was my own. It rhymed in ways I'd never known. The demon laughed, its work complete, for rhymes would guide my slow defeat. It fed upon each word I spoke, each rhyme a tether, every joke. Vincent's voice grew softer, as if reliving the torment. He described how he had tried to rid himself of the demon's influence. He consulted priests, exorcists, even mystics, but none could break the curse. They all warned him of the same thing. To stop rhyming was to lose himself completely, to become an empty vessel for the demon. One night I tried, I dared to cease, hoping to find some kind of peace. The demon came, its voice like ice, "Speak, my pet, or pay the price." I stayed my tongue, I held my breath. To speak again would mean my death. But silence brought a darker fate. It laughed, and I became its slate. No longer man, but rhyme and word. Its puppet now, my voice unheard. I tell you this so you may see. Beware the lure of melody. As Vincent concluded his tale, the room fell silent. The group members looked at one another, their faces pale. One woman clutched the pendant around her neck, while another man nervously tapped his fingers on his knee. The air felt thick, oppressive, as though something unseen had settled among them. Vincent's eyes, glassy and dull, scanned the circle. A small, twisted smile crept across his face as he spoke again, in rhyme and in a guttural, alien voice.
"Did you like my tale? Did it amuse? For now you know I get to choose. Vincent is gone, he's mine to keep, his soul now mine, for he dared to weep. I thank you all for lending ears, and feeding me with all your fears. But fret not long, I'll soon depart, another tale, another heart."
Vincent's body convulsed, his movements jerky and unnatural, his face contorted as if waging an internal war. Then he went still. When he opened his eyes again, they were vacant, hollow. He sat silently, unmoving, as if whatever spark of life had once animated him was now extinguished. He could no longer rhyme or speak with the same vibrancy. He was a husk, a warning to the rest of the group. The others didn't dare speak. The woman with the pendant quietly stood and left the room. Her steps hurried. The man who had been tapping his fingers stared at Vincent, his expression frozen in a mask of fear. The therapist, pale and trembling, could only whisper, "We should end the session." Vincent's tale was not his own, but the demon's. A story told as both a confession and a conquest. Be wary of the voices in your dreams that offer gifts too great to refuse, for every gift has a cost, and some costs are far greater than you can imagine. And if you ever hear a stranger speak in rhyme, tread carefully. They may be cursed, or they may be the one who curses. In either case, do not listen for long. Their words are the demon's snare, and it is always
hungry.